Good morning. This is Dr. Mike, and welcome to week two of our ethics class for vet techs for Cleveland Valley campus. And we are really excited to see you here this morning. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be here in person. As I told you on Friday, I have an intensive this week for my PhD, and that runs Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. So if despair over this class taking an hour and a half out of your day. Think about what it's like to go from 9 to 5 with one of these. But you are in a classroom where a lot of conversations going on, a lot of things of interest. But even that, with long hours, it takes something out of you to see that accomplished. Last week we've had some really great discussions here about what ethics is and how it involves us as human beings, first of all, but it also involves your field that you've chosen to work in. We will, in probably next week, talk about animal ethics and some things that are very pertinent to what you'll be doing in your career. And so I encourage you to look forward to that. This week, as we go through the different lectures, I would encourage you to do the same thing that you have been doing in week one, that you literally read through the text each day as we cover the text. And I kind of give you a jumping off point, a point to work from that I think is helpful because, as I've said, many of the things involved in ethics and philosophy will be rather dense. And depending on your age, you won't probably relate to it as much as you will as you get older, as you grow in life and get life experiences. Ethics becomes much more of a understandable trait, characteristic of us as human beings, and it becomes more important. Most young people don't have the same appreciation for ethical things as we do as we get older because our life experiences have driven us to the point of understanding their importance. On Friday, we talked about egoism and altruism, the idea of being self-centered as opposed to living your life for others. And we have some great examples in our history. I often talk about Mother Teresa and her giving her life working with the poorest of the poor in India, mainly with lepers. And of course, that disease is highly contagious. It'd be very much like our heroes today that are working on the front lines as nurses and doctors taking care of COVID patients. Leprosy is contagious, much like COVID, and it's deadly, and you can be exposed, and you can expose your family, and all those things that we think of. Those people are heroes. We should really take our hats off to our medical people who have worked so hard to keep us alive and keep us healthy. And Mother Teresa did that all of her life, and of course, I think she won a Nobel Prize for that. One of the other outstanding philanthropists and people would be Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. Both of them have given their lives. When you see Jimmy Carter, he's always got a hammer in his hand. He's always working on a house for Habitat for Humanity housing, and he's 96 years old or so. Last week, of course, they talked about their 75th wedding anniversary, and it was quite interesting to hear their comments on how you live together for 75 years. That takes a lot of ethical understanding of each other. Most couples have problems when their ethics differ and they don't have the same understanding, but apparently the Carters do. But the thing about him was that he announced last week at 96 that they're going to build 25 houses for those that are poor that need them, even in Plains, Georgia. So that gives you an idea of what altruism is like. You're constantly giving away, you're doing for other people. Your life, your breath is for somebody else. I found it rather interesting that Carter, when they recently hosted President and Mrs. Biden, that they talked about their house. This guy's a former president of the United States and all kind of won the Nobel Prize, and yet he lives in a house that's 3 bedroom, 1 bath. It's a ranch house that he built himself in the 1960s. And so money doesn't mean a whole lot to him. And that would be true of most people that are interested in being altruistic. The builder barons of the 1800s, people like J.P. Morgan and John Rockefeller and Carnegie and the others, amassed these fabulous fortunes, the Vanderbilts, fabulous fortunes in their life. That was what drove them. And then when they died, they turned around and gave it all back. And they built universities like University of Chicago or Stanford. They built libraries. They funded philharmonics. They gave their money in such a way that it benefited humanity. You see the same thing happening with people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and the Bezos, the former head of Amazon. They want to give their money back to do the most good that it can. Most people, I think, were shocked in the recent COVID problem when Dolly Parton, the country music singer, actually gave $1 million to COVID research to help get the vaccine moving and get it to people that needed it. Those are the way good people behave. They don't hold on to everything they have, and they don't try to, abuse and use people to get to their ends. So that's an important chapter, I think, that we talked about on Friday. Today, I would like to transition into talking about natural law and about human rights, which are other ethical issues that are worth discussing. And we're going to talk about all of those things. And so, if you'll give me just a moment to transition to our screen for our slides, we'll continue this. We'll continue this discussion on ethics and how important they are to who we are as a people. Okay, should be able to see that now, but this is chapter 7 of our textbook, and I hope that you will read through this today just like you normally have been doing, and become familiar with the terms and with the things that are involved when we talk about natural law and natural law theory. There are moral laws. This is what natural law theory says, that there are moral laws found in nature, and they are discernible by the use of reason. Reason, the Enlightenment happened in the world about 1800s, where we began to apply reason to everything. The old standard before that was probably where we applied faith to everything. We tried to understand everything through the lens of the Bible. But when that was kind of rejected and pushed to the side, we began to use reason. That was our lens by which we were able to look to see if there were certain discernible laws in nature. There's laws of natural science, like descriptive laws, how nature behaves. Isaac Newton in the 1700s discovered the law of gravity, for instance, that when you drop an object, gravity says that it falls to the ground. It doesn't float out into outer space somewhere and disappear. That's a natural law of science. It happens every time. Every time you drop something, it falls down. Every time that you do something, you get the same repeatable thing over and over again. That's the scientific method, right? It is observable. You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. It is repeatable. That every time you do the experiment, you expect to get the same kind of reaction. When Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, he made that statement that there were certain laws, and I'll read this to you. In 1776, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Very, very famous words that you probably have heard many, many times, but when you dissect them and understand that what Thomas Jefferson is saying, that these things are evident in nature, that men ought to be free, that they ought to be able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without being hampered, without being hindered more than is necessary in order to keep the peace. So basically, that's one of our founding documents. That is the opening line of our founding documents. And so this natural law is moral, it's prescriptive, it's how we ought to behave, it's how we ought to treat people. And what we ought to do is determined by, considering certain aspects of nature. When you go back and look at history, you'll find some really strange things before 1776. For instance, when the Spaniards came to the New World and Columbus came to Hispaniola and we call it discovering America, even though we know Columbus neither did not discover it. There were many people here before him, including the Vikings and the Russians, and even the Native Americans were here before Columbus was. So he didn't really discover anything. But, you know, when he looked at Native Americans, it's really interesting to see what he had to say with his, his opinion of that. And you can see that in his journal documents because he wrote them in the ship's journal. These people, are beautiful people. Talks about how they were formed. He said, but they don't have any religion because he didn't see a Bible. He didn't see a cross. They don't wear clothes. It wasn't that they were naked. It was that they didn't wear European clothing. They're lazy. They're shiftless. They'll make good servants. That was his first opinion of them. And the Pope got involved in like 1557 and published a papal bull that said that these people are human, so they can receive the gospel of grace and become Christians. It's amazing when you think of it on the surface that they would consider that you had to pass a papal bull to determine whether someone was human or not, and whether they got treated like a human, and whether they had human rights or not. And so that's where the Declaration of Independence starts with, that all men are created equal. Now, we realize in our country that while we have these great documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that those don't mean necessarily that everybody gets those laws. They have to be worked out, it seems, on the ground. We know that from civil rights. We know that from Native American rights. We know that from women's rights and gay rights. All these things, all these individual battles seem to have to be worked out on the ground, and kind of force us to do what we ought to do, when ethically we ought to do it because we want to do it. It ought to be us running with freedoms to give to people, other than them having to wrestle it from us and take it. But it seems like we have to always take it. Historically speaking, several different groups contribute to this idea of natural law. The Greek Stoic says we have a duty to obey the basic laws of nature. Cicero says natural law transcends any time or any space. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s said natural law is a part of the divine plan for the universe, that it was God's plan to give us these freedoms. And a guy by the name of Grotius was the founder of international law that said that it ought to be broad-based and across the whole spectrum, and not just based on one country or one people. For years, the United States has almost been the guarantor of natural law. We're involved where there's been things happen, like, say, Hitler's killing of 6 million Jews and using them for experiments. We were there to help run the Nuremberg trials to bring these people to justice, and I think that's important. So, what are the criticisms against there being a natural law? First of all, it's difficult to read nature. Nature is not an open book, and sometimes it can be misconstrued. The theory seems to endorse social Darwinism, and that is that everybody has to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Everybody's totally free, totally independent, and that's the way that nature designed it. Just because something exists in a certain way doesn't mean that it's good. There are things that exist in nature that are inherently not good, or if you want to use the word, evil. And no truths are self-evident. You have to look for them. You have to search them out. You have to experiment with them to be sure that they are worthwhile and long-lasting and important. John Locke was a very interesting character. He was the secretary of Lord Ashley, to whom North and South Carolina were given by the king, and John Locke actually wrote South Carolina's first constitution. So, as a former South Carolinian, I have that to brag about. But he had a certain theory of natural rights, that certain things are essential to people. He was the one that came up with this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are rights not because they're granted by some state, but because they are important to us as human beings. These are moral rights that have to be ensured by institutions. And so that's why the government needs to be in the picture. Uh, Ideally, states should run their own business. But of course, we know that as going forward, that people become so engrossed in their own self-interest that unless the federal government ensures it, people are going to lose their rights. So things like slavery, it was a federal law that a federal amendment to the Constitution that ended slavery, that allowed the black folks the right to vote. Things like that have to be ensured, because if they're left up to states, as we know from some of the present behavior, they're not going to get very far in that process. Uh, and so these are moral institutions that need to be ensured by institutions. So therefore, today, various international codes of human rights contain elements of natural rights that should belong to everyone. Uh, as far as evaluating natural right theory, Jeremy Bentham said there are no rights outside the legal and political system. And there are some problems with that. Not everybody agrees on what human nature requires, or which natural rights are central and which are not central. So, what about human beings who are not natural as traditionally defined, or normal? How do you define that? Those are words that you could fill with almost any kind of a definition, the idea of natural or normal. Certain people in our society have been made to feel abnormal and to be made to feel unnatural. They're cognitively disabled. Or what about animals? How do you treat them? Do they have natural rights as well? The other question that's important to consider is the question of if there is a human nature. We often talk about human nature, but does it really exist? Natural rights and human rights both rest upon an objective account of human nature, and believe that human nature is not created by us or constructed by society. It is not a societal construct, but it is a part of our being and our DNA. Jean Paul Sartre said there are no essential human nature. We create our own natures. Rorty said there's nothing to people other than what has been socialized into them. And the fundamental question is there an enduring, or is there an identifiable human nature? Can you actually point it out in a person's being? Thomas Aquinas, the famous theologian of the 1200s, said this about natural law: there are precepts of natural law. All virtuous acts, and we'll talk about virtue later on in the week, pertain to the natural law. He asks the question, is there one natural law that fits all? Because we all don't share the same truth. And the end of human law is the well-being of humans. That should be the point. That was the point of the Declaration of Independence. And we've seen how that's worked out over 300 years of being in America. Laws fashioned by humans must accord with religion, foster discipline, advance well-being, inasmuch as it's proportional to human needs. And I think those are important concepts. John Locke, in his second treatise on civil government, said, to understand political power, we must consider that people naturally have freedom, and you need to give them all the freedom that they can under the laws. The execution of the law of nature is put into all men's hands to refrain from invading others' rights. So basically, my freedom ends where your nose begins, as some people used to say. And the state of liberty is not a state of license. It's not about letting you get away with crimes or things that are illegal, but it also involves the power of the magistrate, who is there to help you, or to help us to keep ourselves in order. In this day we talk a lot about defunding the police or whatever. Could you imagine a state? I mean, we look at Haiti a couple of days ago, where they gunned down their prime minister, their president, 12 times. They shoot him. Our government, our country, could very well be in that state of lawlessness. That's not so far fetched when you consider January the 6th, the insurrection on the Capitol in Washington, where they tried to overthrow the vote count. We're just one breath away from that. And so without a society of morals and values in which they are enforced. Those are things we agree on, but we also agree that we have the power of the magistrate to enforce those. We would all be in chaos and in hysteria as a country. There are myriads of countries around the world that are exactly that. They are in chaos. Syria, Iran, Iraq, all those places, Afghanistan, Cuba, any place, just about any place you can name, Haiti now, of course. So, it's everybody's duty that we understand. It's one thing to have the freedoms to protest and to go against the things that we don't agree with, but you realize that once you have tipped it over into anarchy, then it can become like the French Revolution, where everybody was sent to the guillotine, finally, including the guys who started the revolution. So you have to be very careful about that. Well, I hope that you have taken something from the lecture today that will prove to be important to you as you read the materials. If you have questions, please jot them down, email me, or we'll talk about it when I'm back a week from today. But I am here to help. I am watching emails, and I can't really take phone calls. I can't take texts this week. So if you want to contact me, please do so. I don't have anything more important than taking care of you. You will also receive tonight at about 7:30 a text with the link to a live chat, and I'll look forward to talking to you about. I'll be around about 30 minutes to discuss the things that you need to discuss. Have a great day. Get your work in. Don't forget when you finish with the lecture that you email me to tell me that you've heard, so I can count you in attendance. And I'll look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Bye bye.